Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Let me know your city in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. It truly helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. I've always believed gardens tell the truth about people. Mine certainly does. It's not fancy, just a square of soil behind my small house, bordered by rosemary bushes and an old oak that drops leaves faster than I can rake them. That afternoon, the light was soft, the kind that makes you slow down without realizing it. I was kneeling by the tomatoes when I sensed someone standing near the gate. It was my neighbor's son, Daniel. I'd known him since he was young, back when scraped knees and borrowed bikes were the biggest concerns of the day. Now he was grown, carrying himself differently, with a quiet weight in his shoulders. He asked if he could sit for a moment. His voice was polite, but uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he should be there at all. We sat on the old wooden bench under the oak. The air smelled of soil and late summer. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. I didn't rush him. Years have taught me that silence can be an invitation, not an obstacle. Finally, he told me he felt stuck. Not lost exactly, but unsure which part of himself to trust. Work, expectations, the feeling that time was moving faster than he was. He said it all came together in a knot he couldn't untangle alone. He said he remembered how I used to listen, how I never laughed things away or offered quick answers. As he spoke, I realized how rarely people are simply heard. I didn't see him as my neighbor's child anymore, but as a man trying to find his footing. I shared a little of my own past, choices I'd questioned, paths I'd taken slowly, and how guidance doesn't always come as answers, but as patience with yourself. The garden seemed to lean in around us, leaves stirring gently, as if it understood the importance of the moment. When he stood to leave, he looked lighter somehow, and I stayed on the bench, aware that something meaningful had begun, even if I didn't yet know where it would lead. The days after that afternoon felt different, as if the garden itself had shifted its rhythm. I found myself noticing small things more clearly, the way the wind brushed the chimes by the porch, how the soil held warmth even after sunset. Daniel didn't come by right away, and I didn't expect him to. Some conversations need time to breathe. When he did return, it was early evening. The sky had that pale orange glow that always reminds me of second chances. He stood at the gate again, this time with a steadier posture, though his hands still gave him away. I waved him in, and he smiled, a real one, not the polite kind. We talked while I watered the plants. It felt easier this time. He told me he'd been thinking about what we discussed, how strange it felt to admit uncertainty out loud. I told him uncertainty wasn't a weakness. It was often the first honest step forward. He listened carefully, like each word mattered, and that kind of attention is rare. At one point, he asked how I learned to be comfortable with my own choices. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because the truth was simple and hard at the same time. I said I wasn't always comfortable. I said I learned by making peace with mistakes, by understanding that growth doesn't follow a straight line. We sat again under the oak, the bench creaking beneath us. I noticed how the garden felt like a neutral ground, a place without expectations. Daniel admitted he felt pressure to be someone he wasn't ready to be. I told him that readiness isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, one honest decision at a time. As the light faded, our conversation slowed. There was no rush to fill the pauses. I could sense his relief in being able to speak without being judged or corrected. When he finally stood to leave, he thanked me, not with big words, just a quiet sincerity that lingered after he walked away. I stayed outside long after, listening to the evening settle in. I realized then that guidance isn't about leading someone forward. Sometimes it's about walking beside them for a moment, long enough for them to see their own path more clearly. By the third week, our conversations had found a gentle rhythm. Daniel would stop by after work, sometimes with a question, sometimes with nothing more than a need to sit quietly. The garden had become our meeting place, not because we planned it that way, but because it asked nothing of us. It simply allowed us to be present. One evening, clouds rolled in low and heavy, and the air felt charged. We moved the bench closer to the porch, the first drops of rain tapping the leaves like soft applause. Daniel seemed more thoughtful than usual. He spoke about his father, about expectations passed down without explanation, about the fear of disappointing people he loved. His voice didn't shake, but I could hear how carefully he chose his words. I told him about my own years of trying to live up to quiet standards no one had ever clearly set. I admitted how long it took me to understand that approval from others can never replace self-respect. Saying it out loud reminded me how far I'd come, and how much of that journey involved listening rather than doing. The rain picked up, steady and calm. Daniel asked if I ever regretted choosing a quieter life. I looked around, the wet earth, the worn steps, the oak standing patient and strong. I told him that a quiet life isn't empty. It's full of meaning if you pay attention. Regret, I said, usually comes from not being honest with yourself. Something shifted in his expression then. Not a sudden change, but a settling, like a thought finally finding its place. He said he felt clearer, not because his problems were gone, but because they didn't feel so heavy anymore. I reminded him that clarity often arrives before confidence, and that's perfectly fine. When the rain eased, he stood and thanked me again. This time he didn't rush away. He paused, took a breath, and said he felt respected here. That stayed with me long after he left. As I closed the garden gate, I understood that whatever this was becoming, it was rooted in trust, and that kind of growth is always worth protecting. The last time Daniel came by that season, autumn had already begun to claim the garden. The tomatoes were gone, replaced by neat rows of turned soil, resting for what would come next. The oak had started shedding more leaves than usual, and I'd learned to see that not as an ending, but as preparation. He arrived with a calm I hadn't seen before. We walked slowly along the edge of the garden instead of sitting right away. He told me he'd made a decision at work, not a dramatic one, but an honest one. He'd spoken up about what he wanted, even though it scared him. Not everything changed, he said, but something inside him did. I listened, feeling a quiet pride that had nothing to do with credit and everything to do with witnessing growth. I told him that moments like that are markers in a life. You don't always see them when they happen, but later you realize that's where the direction shifted. We sat one last time on the bench. The air was crisp, and the light faded earlier now. He asked me if I ever thought about the people who helped shape my own life. I told him I did often. Some stayed, some passed through briefly, but all of them mattered. Guidance, I said, doesn't require permanence to be meaningful. When he stood to leave, there was a sense of completion, not distance. He thanked me, and this time I told him something important, that he'd done the hard work himself. All I'd offered was a place to think out loud. After he left, I stayed in the garden as the evening settled. I thought about how unexpected connections can arrive quietly, without asking permission, and how powerful it is to simply be present for another person. As I gathered the fallen leaves, I felt grateful, not just for the season ending, but for what it had given both of us. Some lessons aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to change us, and then let us move forward, a little steadier than before.